Hello, dosto. So next question is related to 1031 exchanges. So this gentleman here, Rohit, he had the property, and his question is, Deepak ji, I'm about to sell my property. I'll be closing within the next 1 week. Is it possible for me to still do 1031 exchange? All right, Rohit. Um, uh, I understand what your question is, but many details are missing. So, for example, um, what's the amount of gain? Are we talking about $50,000 gain, or are we talking about $200,000 gain, or $1 million gain? So that's important, because if the gain is not a whole lot there, do we really even want to do 1031 exchange? That's number one. Number two, I would like to know a little bit more about your tax situation overall outside of real estate property, because that will also help me determine whether 1031 is the right strategy for you or not. But I'm going to leave those parts out and simply focus on the question that you have asked. So I'm going to explain how 1031 works. Can you still do it? What kind of things you need to pay attention to stay out of trouble. So we'll focus on those. But my advice to you, once again, is to set up a consultation appointment, and let's look into a little bit more detail and figure out if that's even the right thing for you to do. And if yes, how should we go about that? All right. So those of you guys who are new to my channel, my name is Deepak. I'm a tax code advisor. I like to talk about strategy that help people reduce their taxes, perhaps even eliminate them in some cases. And I like to talk about what's happening in our economy, what's happening in markets, what's happening in real estate, what's happening with H-1B, and people who wants to come set up businesses here, or people who run businesses here in the United States. So that's what I like to talk about. So if you're interested in those kind of topics, in a nutshell, how do you build wealth in this country? That's the focus, and all of those things kind of fit perfectly with that. So that's what I like to talk about. So if you're interested in those kind of topics, then do subscribe to the channel, and we'll take on that conversation. All right, 1031. Why do we want to do it to begin with? So we like to do 1031 exchange because we don't want to pay capital gain taxes. Isn't that wonderful? So, for example, those of you guys who don't know, most people in California make really, really good money. And I will assume in this case that Rohit also is making a decent amount of money, and more than likely he's in a higher capital gain bracket. That means he's more than likely paying about 20%. And then on top of that, we have that net investment income tax, which is roughly about 4%. So we are at 24%, plus he has California taxes. I'll just make a rough guess. Maybe he's at about 30% tax bracket. Now, if Rohit owns a property, and let's just say he bought the property a few years ago for $500,000, which I don't know, I'm just making it up. He didn't share that information with me. And now he's selling it, let's say, for $1 million. So he had a $500,000 gain. That means on that $500,000 gain, he has to pay roughly about 30% in taxes. Simple math, that's $150,000 in taxes. And Rohit is wondering, hey, I just figured out this 1031 stuff. And I, once again, making that up because he's asking this question at the last minute. He's about to sell his property next week. So I'm assuming recently he came across this strategy, and that's why he's asking that question. So, can he use this strategy and save $150,000 in taxes this year? The short answer, Rohit, is yes. You can still set up that transaction and still do 1031 exchange. Why? Because you have not closed that transaction. You have not taken possession of the money. So everything is still in process. So you can still set it up for 1031 exchange. So how does 1031 exchange works? You need to remember two major deadlines. Number one deadline is 60 days. That means within the 60 days after you sell your first property, you need to identify which other property are you planning on buying. Okay, you can have one property, two property, three properties, doesn't matter. You can identify multiple properties. Nobody's stopping you from that. And then within the 6 months, you need to close on those properties. You don't have to close on all of them, but let's just say your original property was sold for $1 million. That means your new purchase combined, it could be one or more than one properties, has to be $1 million or more. As long as you meet those three requirements, you are all set to execute 1031 exchange. All right. Now, one thing to keep in mind is when you're doing 1031 exchange, your new property now the basis calculation for depreciation purposes will be a little bit different, because remember, on your existing property you have already taken depreciation. But that's a whole different matter. That's why I always recommend talk to a tax professional to figure out if it even makes sense to begin with. Sometime it does, sometime it doesn't. So a lot of time people just look at that figure number one that is going to save me taxes this year, but they don't forget they're still going to be paying taxes the year after, year after. So sometime it doesn't make sense. But generally speaking, 60 days to identify the properties and 6 months to close the transaction. And your new purchase combined has to be more than what your older property was. So if it was $1 million, the new property has to be $1 million or more. Like I said, it could be two properties, so it could be 550,000, 550,000. Maybe you do a $1.1 million property. That's fine, but you cannot go 900. That's where we go into trouble. Second part you got to remember is when you sell this first property, make sure you do not touch cash. You're going to let your escrow company that you're doing a 1031 exchange. That means when the money comes, it does not go into your bank account. It stays with the escrow company. You're not touching it. If you touch that money, it becomes boot, that you have taken a possession of the money, and now that transactions become taxable. So you have to be very careful with that. Do not touch those funds. Let it sit with the intermediary. Let them know that you're doing 1031 exchange. And within the 60 days, identify the property. And then within the 6 months, go ahead and find a new property. So be very careful with that. So that's how 1031 exchanges work, generally speaking. So I hope I answered that question for you. But my recommendation for you would still be that you seek out some help, reach out, and and let's talk a little bit more in detail. Now, some of you guys might be wondering, Deepak, what if I'm closing this weekend? Is it still possible? Absolutely. Like I said, it's fairly straightforward to set it up. It's not that complicated. You need to work with your escrow company as long as they participate in 1031 exchange. That should not be a problem. Now, I want to talk to rest of you guys who are into real estate and you are thinking about selling a property, or maybe one day you will be selling a property. Well, my suggestion to you would be, if you're in process selling a property, always assume that you're going to do 1031, even if you don't. Because if you don't, there's no penalty, right? You still pay your regular taxes just like anybody else. But you don't want to feel that pressure at the last moment. It gets really crazy. You may be able to get a tax professional to help you out. You might not. Escrow companies can get busy. All kind of things can happen. So if you're thinking about selling a property, always assume that you are going to do a 1031 exchange. So from a day one, you let the escrow company know that it is 1031 exchange. This gives you enough time to do your own research, start thinking about it, start figuring out whether it makes sense or not. So that's what I tell all my clients that don't even think about paying taxes. Think about doing 1031 from day one, because if you think like that, you're going to act like that, and more than likely, if you act like that, you're going to perhaps find another good opportunity and reinvest your money into another property and build a great legacy for yourself. All right, Rohit, I wish you all the luck. I hope this transaction works out just fine for you. If there's anything I can do to help you out, or any of you guys anywhere in the country, and you're looking for a tax advisor to help you with your tax situation, don't hesitate to reach out to me. Just go to taxcodeadvisor.com and set up a consultation appointment from there. And don't forget to like and subscribe to this channel, so that way you get all the other interesting tax questions notified to you as well. Thank you. And by the way, if you have a tax question, definitely leave it in the comments, and I'll try to cover that for you in the next video as well.